Alright everybody, welcome back to Strife. This video and the next video that's going to come up are going to be a little bit odd in comparison to anything else that I've done previously on this channel, largely due to a mistake I've made. And that's a mistake related to Audacity, rather than the actual playing of the game. When the setting for the microphone was set to the USB instead of the Yeti, which resulted in illegible, like, speech. Like, there's no way it could have been amplified, saved, edited. So, I'm going to attempt to record over this footage, hopefully get something that resembles some sort of commentary. Hopefully that doesn't happen again, because in the meantime, though, I believe the next thing I have to do on my list is go to the factory. Save the rebels from becoming biomechanical mutants of death. Which, on one hand, sounds pretty rad, but I suppose it's only rad if you are amongst the biomechanical mutants, and if you were like, hey, if the Empire was like, hey, you want sweet biomechanical legs, and then you're like, sure, and then they're like,
Deus,
oh,
you got
hold
here.
on.
To enter the factory, you need a key. We stole it, but our agent is missing in the web of catacombs under the Order's stronghold. I've sent 10 good men into those tunnels to find him, and none have returned. Something is down there.
What is it, human or?
Not. Definitely not. Whatever it is, you must fight it to retrieve the key. I'll open the catacombs entrance. When you've got it, the factory is next to the mines. Hurry, each second counts.
Something inhuman, eh? Great.
You're wasting time and lives. Move!
Thanks, bye. So I guess Richter Belmont here pretty much did a decent job summing up what's going on in the plot.
The factory is next to the mines. Richter must mean the mines of Degnan. The Degnan ore is magnetic and explosive. Just the thing for shutting down force fields.
Now at some point I think over here I was like, where am I supposed to go? And then I get the brilliant idea of eventually hitting the map key. It takes a little while. So this series of levels is a little bit I guess this kind of showcases Strife in that, okay, you have to get to the factory, but in order to get to the factory you have to shut off the force field, but in order to shut off the force field you have to get into the mines, and in order to get to the mines you also have to get a key. To get the key you have to go into the catacombs. One thing always leads to the other. The biggest example of that, I would say, would probably be the classic game System Shock 2. The majority of the game is spent just trying to get to the 4th floor of the Rickenbacker. But in order to get to the 4th floor, you need to turn on the elevator. In order to turn on the elevator, you need to get to the power station, or get to the power station, or engineering. In order to get to engineering, you need the key. In order to get the key, you have to, so many, like, little tasks that prevent you from progressing, that you find yourself just kind of, the story doesn't necessarily move forward. Although actually in this case there's going to be a part towards like the actual acquisition of the key does add a little bit more to the story. So there's a little bit of... And then with like System Shock 2, you always have all those audio recordings that you're finding. You're discovering more about the world around you. So even though like the main plot is kind of moving along in bits and pieces, the side plots are always kind of building the world around you. Now, what's interesting about like this setting is even though there's this evil empire that's turning people into biomechanical mutants, there's still a fountain filled with coins, which presumes that people are throwing the coins into the fountain, whether it's the soldiers or the slaves. I guess it's not... I think I assumed the soldiers when I was passing through here, but I suppose it would make more sense it was the slaves, but... the idea that even as biomechanical mutant soldiers, they would still be superstitious. They would still make a wish in a fountain. It gives the idea that maybe not all of their humanity is gone, just maybe a memory of their humanity remains. And also that they would have a tavern, like, even though they're these twisted shells of man, their desire for beer has not diminished. But now into the catacombs.
Mines, catacombs, sewers. What a first date.
Would you really encompass the trio of mines, catacombs, and sewers into one date, or would each venture be a separate date? Like, I suppose this all is kind of happening on the same day. Oh, and this was my expert plan to lure every single spider in the area after me. Very, very clever of me to use myself as bait. Yes. But like, if you're going out with a girl and you're like, hey, you want to go to these mines, catacombs, and sewers, and then she considers them all one date, that really makes it difficult to figure out what you're going to do for the next date, because it's like, wow, how are you going to compete with all three? But if you consider them separate dates, then it's like, oh, we went to the mines on one date, and then the catacombs on another. It was good times for everybody. Well, not everybody. Some people died. Some of those people may have been innocent, I admit. But overall, the rebellion was better off without those random civilians standing in their way. I still find it interesting how like the missile hits the ceiling spiders in its 2D space. It doesn't just blow up immediately. It's like it slides across the ceiling first before exploding. But I think I talked about that before. Oh yeah. And then there was another thing that I was talking about before that I didn't really get around to finishing. And that's the idea of using health kits to heal yourself versus using regenerating life. Like, I personally like the idea of regenerating life, only on the basis that it allows the designer of the game to craft a scenario, like let's say it's easier to kind of talk about it in RPG terms. Yeah, I was trying to get past that spider and it didn't work out. In that, like, imagine every battle you go into, Every battle you go into, you are refreshed health magic, meaning that your systems are always full for every encounter. Now, the advantage of this is that whenever if the designers would decide how to place enemies, they can do so in such a fashion that they know that in this encounter you have full health, you have full mana, you are ready and able to fight the villain, as opposed to most RPGs in which the idea is that from save point to boss, every hit is going to kind of slowly chip away at your resources until you are at your...
Oh crap, I have no idea where we are.
Yeah, Blackbird gets lost a lot. Until you're at your weakest state, in which case you finally fight the boss. But okay, so that means that essentially the design has to be focused on, okay, what is the player bringing into the dungeon? What is the player going to end up with by the time they get to the final boss? And that's where you usually get the entire idea of boss fountains. Like, how do you know that you're coming up against a boss? You enter a room and it's filled with health items, it's filled with ammo, because the designers of the game were like, oh wait, we didn't put enough stuff. Or we're pretty sure that we've weakened the player to such a degree that they will not be able to defeat the boss with their current resources. So here, take all this stuff and recover. But at the same time, like, the idea of a boss fountain has kind of the developer revealing its hand. Like, hey, you know there's a boss coming up in the next room. Get your head ready for it, because see...
I wish Richter had been a touch more specific. Let's try over here.
Yeah, Richter Belmont could have been way more specific about... he could have even given us a map. Like, I believe they have maps in this world. I've found, like, maybe a couple of them, but that's okay. But, like, if you walk into a room and it's filled with health and ammo, it's basically the developer telling you what's going to happen next. And there's something to be said about surprise. Minor tangent, it kind of reminds me of the Tomb Raider reboot. Lara gets this ability to grab onto, like, specific stone walls. They stand out. They're like this gray wall. And you could use your hiking tool thing, I don't remember what it was called, to latch onto them. And so there's this point of the game in which you're on a rope that's moving horizontally, and you look ahead of you, and there's this gray stone wall, and below the rope, and below that there is nothing. And then it's like, okay, I can clearly see the gameplay mechanic ahead of me. I know that the rope is going to break, and I'm going to have to latch onto that concrete wall. And lo and behold, the rope breaks. And we enter the ruins. Slowly but surely. No rush. We gotta examine those corners. Gotta watch them corners. If you've learned anything from Call of Duty. Now, with games that have... I think Blackbird is going to say something any minute now. But with games that have like the health kits, not only does this kind of lead to the idea of boss fountains, but this also makes exploration a requirement. So the gameplay becomes...
This must be the ruins that Richter's agents were searching for. Watch out! Crusaders!
I felt that was really good timing with her voice clip, in that she says, "Watch out, Crusaders," right as I'm popping around the corner and I see the robot. Now, my solution to this is incredibly stupid. Because there are a lot of robots, but I decide, you know what? I'm just going to keep backing up and going back and forth and throw flames at all of them and use up the entirety of the combat armor that I'm wearing and some of the next combat armor that I still have not worn. Blowing through most of my field health kits, which seems like it's probably a bad idea, but I end up getting all of it back anyway. Some nice sacrifice going on there. At least he was able to still be wearing his underwear. You do not want to take away the dignity of the people you ritually sacrifice. That would be rude. Now, I've actually defeated almost all of the villains in this area. There's only like a handful of these flying robots who move really slowly, so that's why they kind of got held back. And I think those are the last two soldiers. Spectre. I'm sure that is exactly how I sounded when I saw it the first time, too. Now, one thing to notice is it does have the most basic sigil attacks. When I actually get around to fighting it, it only takes one hit to knock it out, which gives about the idea that it wasn't necessarily meant to be like a complete boss, but more like a plot boss. Also, this Spectre does not drop a sigil piece. Oh, there I go, fumbling with the buttons again. It does not drop a sigil piece, but it still has the lightning abilities.
My friend, whatever it is we're fighting, it's more than just the Order. Off to the mines.
It took her this long to figure that one out. Let's see, we've got... So, it looks like we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These must be the 10 guys, and there's some other dead guys here anyway. But I'm sure they were killed. They were just regular, the Empire bad guys that were just killed by the Spectre. I would imagine that would be the trouble working for this sort of organization. Likely don't tell the difference between friend or foe. Especially since, you know, so the Oracle has me kill off the Bishop, and the Bishop is an ally to the Order. But why? Like, in retrospect, I don't really understand why I was supposed to... Like, what does the Oracle gain from killing off the Bishop, the leader of the army? Now, you could argue that maybe the Oracle wanted to take over the army, but he doesn't really leave his post, I guess, yet. So there's that. I mean, maybe I'm expecting a bit too much from somebody who looks like Doctor Doom, but that's probably the case. Anyway, factory key in hand. It's now time to head back to the... Actually, not even the factory itself. The key doesn't even go to the factory. It goes to the mines. The factory has that shield around it. And it's at this point I get a little lost. I'm like, how am I going to get back to town? Or back to the Commons area? My first thought was to try to go through the... Oh yeah, very convenient teleporter. Only sort of convenient, really, in retrospect. Because it only kind of takes you, like, halfway. And then you're still got a little bit of a maze of catacombs ahead of you. And a lot of these corners kind of look like each other, so... Now, my first thought was to try to go through the Bailey. Which did not really work out, because once again I'm left flipped upside down. As to where any of the exits in the Bailey are. I always kind of... Every time I go into this place, it seems like I always kind of go the wrong way. Although, in my defense, there are like 5 or 6 different entrances into this area. So there's the security complex. Nope. Go too far to this weird water reclamation area. And there I go. Now, you could argue that having waypoints has kind of diluted some of the challenge. And that's true. But at the same time, yeah, I didn't really want to see what the ramifications of that alarm would actually entail, so I cut back. And made another attempt to try to find the exit that went directly to the Commons area. But I would argue that one of the best features in any modern game is also the ability to set your own waypoints. So it doesn't necessarily need to constantly tell you how to get to where you need to go. But at the very least, it's sometimes nice to have a little bit of direction. I've been playing Evil Within 2 at the moment, and that game does something interesting in that the way to proceed, you have this communicator device. You have this communicator that is used to pick up the signal. In order to see the waypoint, you have to use the communicator. If you don't use the communicator, the waypoint is not on the map, or on the HUD. And I feel that kind of works a little bit better, in that it's not an always constant arrow at the top of the screen telling you, hey, go here. It's more of like a reference to be like, hey, where am I? Where am I going? Right now, to the mines. Next time on Strife.